You are watching Green TV, brought to you by Energy and Technology Update.
Present, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of my presentation today is so I'll be speaking on this topic, renewable energy policy. So I'll be speaking on this topic today, renewable energy policy development and capacity addition in India, a perspective for the 12th five-year plan, which is from the period 2012 to 17. So I would want to cover the following points in a brief overview. Number one, the government's perspective on promoting renewable energy in India, the institutional support mechanism and incentives for renewable energy development in India, the draft targets for the RE capacity addition for India's 12th five-year plan, and lastly, we'll shortly focus on the major challenges faced in the RE sector capacity addition in India till date, and some mitigation mechanisms going forward being proposed to the government by the government. These are, I would definitely say that these are very exciting times for the renewable energy sector in India. You know, with the market under a constant state of flux and changing policies, cost structure, regulatory mechanisms. You know, the various stakeholders are, you know, the various stakeholders, especially the investor community, they are on their toes all the time. And probably I'm handling the most controversial topic in the entire conference. The words renewable energy and the government, you know, whenever they come together, they invite a lot of criticism. Everything comes with a pinch of salt. The government is not doing enough. They are slow moving, bad implementers. They don't think about the people. I mean, they are tied up in their own politics and all that stuff. You know what, as you now already know by Ms. Seaman, that you know, that working in the corporate sector and now working with the Planning Commission, you know, which is the planning body of the country, you know, I have also started appreciating, you know, the cautiousness with which the government has to undertake any development step in this space. You know, I am not in favor of the inflexibility and the, you know, and the slow implementation part of it. You know, but the basic point which we have to understand is that renewable energy is like we are trying to sell a product in the market where the nearest alternative is around 3 to 4 times cheaper than that. So when the government is dealing with renewable energy, actually they are tied down between, you know, these, you know, the concepts of energy security, climate change on one hand, and the development sector issues on the other hand. I mean, if a person is dying for food, he doesn't give a damn about, you know, whether he's getting renewable energy in his home, or is he getting a lamp, or is he burning kerosene, or is he getting coal-based electricity. He needs food, water. So, you know, the Maslow's pyramid of needs, you know, so he doesn't give a damn to, you know, so where the electricity comes from. So that's why, you know, so the development sector on the internal part, and, you know, and the global geopolitics and the energy security on the outer part, you know, so there's a constant tussle between that. So I think the cost component is the most critical in this space, and almost all bottlenecks, you know, whether we say infrastructure, implementation, finance not available, directly or indirectly, you know, arises out of the cost aspect of renewables at this point in time. This is my personal opinion. This is what I have felt working in the government and the corporate sector. I would cover a lot of aspects in my presentation today, and I'm far from an expert in many of them. I mean, the data and the recommendations which I'll be coming to in the last part are the actual recommendations made by the Committee on Energy for the 12th plan, just day before yesterday. So a lot of data which we'll see on the slides is actually not available, you know, publicly. So Yeah, but it will be available publicly a few months down the line. But I thought, that I should not be like hiding data. So, when a conference is happening, where the relevant stakeholders are there, they should at least get to know, that what is happening, or, what is the government proposing or thinking about. Now, whether or not those recommendations get included in the 12th plan, that is to be seen in the next couple of months. So basically, a lot of consultation processes and internal debates happen, before any recommendations get included in the 12th plan, or any plan for that matter. So yeah, sir, let's begin with the presentation. First, I thought it would be appropriate, if I start with a broad level, the government's perspective on promoting renewable energy in India. Because government is, it's a no-brainer, but the government is not a profit-making body. So what is the government's perspective on promoting this space in India? So India's mammoth projected energy requirements. This data is from the Integrated Energy Policy of 2006. And I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Parekh directly. And he's the guy who's actually written four out of the 6 chapters of this IEP. So, India needs to sustain an economic growth of 9% over the next 20 years to eradicate poverty. Now, this is based on the Tendulkar Committee's report on, how much GDP should grow, how can people be elevated out of poverty. So, India needs to grow at a GDP of 9% over the next 20 years to meet its human development goals. But while meeting the requirements of this growth of this magnitude in a sustainable manner, it's a major, major challenge. While India's current per capita energy consumption is very low as compared to the world average, but it's slated to grow because the people wanting access to modern means of energy, and urbanization increasing. The IEP, as it's called, estimates that India's primary energy supply will need to increase by 4 to 5 times and its electricity generation capacity by 6 to 7 times of its 2003 to 2004 levels to deliver a sustained growth rate of 9% by the year 2031-32. And this includes the primary energy supply growth of around 5.8% per year growth. This is a CAGR. The commercial energy supply would need to grow faster at about 6.8% per annum, as it will incrementally replace the non-commercial energy over this period. And, so even the projections say, that whatever India might do will be hugely dependent on imported fuel by the year 2030-31. And that is an unsustainable thing, where all the countries are grappling and trying to access fuel sources worldwide. So India will face a huge challenge in that, and hence it's an imperative for the government to develop alternate sources of energy. And this is the second thing which the government is very, very cognizant about, that there is a reducing gap in the renewable energy and conventional energy costs. I've taken this data from whatever most credible sources I could find, and the cost of power generation through renewables is declining sharply, and at the same time, the same for conventional sources is continuously rising due to constant supply constraints and decreasing subsidies and ever-increasing demand. And the concept of grid parity is now being widely focused on, and once achieved, the demand for renewable energy will have an unprecedented rise. The government is cognizant of this, and hence, they want to start building on this as soon as possible, given all the other constraints as I talked about. And, as Naseeman also talked about, so India's RE potential is currently hugely unexplored. India predominantly is a renewable resource-rich country. However, except wind energy, renewable energy-based electricity has been a relatively recent phenomenon in the country. The various organizations have projected different and a much greater potential for the so-called, for the grid-connected and decentralized renewable energy applications. But even if I consider the so-called conservative official estimates of the government of India till date, renewable energy is highly underexplored, and hence it offers a huge scope for play for both the government and the private sector. One more important development which has taken place during all these years, which I see, is that that the government is extremely open and flexible, towards proposals which ask about reassessing the renewable energy resources in the country, especially wind energy. After that Lawrence Berkeley reporting that there has been a huge hue and cry that the government estimates are all wrong, and the estimate is much more and all that. I mean, I have my points against that as well, but we can discuss that later. And then,
can I take one question?
Sure.
It's up to when solar potential? It's up to 2030, 34, 20,000 megawatts?
No. So for this,
that's not mentioned.
So for this solar, if you can just see the asterisks.
Yeah.
So for solar, I have just considered the national solar mission thing.
That's up to
2017. Yeah, so that's up to 2020.
20.
That is 20 gigawatts of grid connected. And then yes, we have the global issue of climate change. The greenhouse gas emissions in the country depend on many things. The lifestyle, GDP growth, the levels of economic activity, trade patterns, urbanization, population density, etc. Thus, not only the total emissions, but also per capita emissions vary widely across countries. India is the 4th largest greenhouse gas emitter after China, US and Russia, in absolute terms. Energy sector is the major emitter, and electricity generation is the major contributor to these emissions. And having considerable renewable energy in the overall power mix can definitely abate this situation of global concern. So I've given an explanation to the various components on this pie chart as an appendix to my presentation, because all these components actually mean something, so I've included that in the appendix slide. All these 3-4 factors which I've talked about are expected to propel the grid-connected renewable energy in India going forward. These are the estimates which I've taken from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy's strategic document, which is available online as well, which talks about the present installation and projected grid-connected renewable energy in India by 2022. So it talks about the current as on 30th August 2011. Those are the white bars, and the red bars are the projected numbers of grid connected RE by 2022. Yeah, so currently we have 21,125 megawatts of grid connected RE capacity in India, which represents around 11% of the total installed capacity. This has sharply grown from 2% and 3,475 megawatts in 2002. And riding on the growth factors mentioned in the previous slides, the MNRE sees a realistic achievement of around 72,000 megawatts of grid-connected renewable energy by 2022. Though, while their aspirational numbers are much higher than this, but I thought that I should take the more realistic numbers, to give a better picture. And not only grid-connected, as Naseeman was, had some concerns about the off-grid or decentralized applications. The government, the MNRE, I would say, is also thinking greatly about the off-grid or decentralized RE deployment. So this has definitely more flavor to it. So because this is not only the electricity capacity. This also talks about cooking stoves, rural electrification, number of villages, hamlets being electrified, and all that. Yeah, RGGBY is another issue we can talk about. So the decentralized applications are particularly important because of the potential social and environmental positive impacts it can cause in India by offering access to around 40% households, or approximately 400 million people who do not have access to modern energy in India. So yeah, so this is where I end with the government's perspective on developing RE in India. Next part of my presentation, I would want to focus on the institutional support mechanism and the incentives for renewable energy development in the country. So I start by this. So let's begin by having a broad overview. I mean, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but I thought I should start with the basics on this. So this is how the overall energy sector institutional structure at the center looks like. This includes dedicated ministries for handling various sources of energy, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Ministry of Coal, Department of Atomic Energy, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. It also has the Ministry of Environment and Forest and the planning and the regulatory bodies in place. The Ministry of Power overarches the overall power production and the transmission distribution of electricity in the country. All the utilities, power grid, power trading corporation, etc. fall under the CEA, which is the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC, and the Central Electricity Authority, CEA. The key takeaway is that India is the only country worldwide which has a dedicated ministry for the promotion of renewable energy, and it's called the MNRE, or the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And while the previous structure looked at the mechanism at the central level, at the state level it looks like this. The State Electricity Regulatory Commission falls under the CERC, as I mentioned before. The state utilities, generation companies, distribution companies, and transmission companies fall under the Department of Power. Majority of these states also have their respective state renewable development agencies. So all states, almost all the states have a state nodal agencies called the SNAs to oversee their respective implementation of renewable energy programs. Now what I've done in this slide is that I've combined the previous two slides, which talks about structure at the center and the state, and this is how the overall renewable energy institution support mechanism in the country looks like. So MNRE is the central ministry responsible. The Ministry of Power, state nodal agencies, and NTPC's Vidyut Vibhag Nigam, NVVN, forms an important part of the implementation of specifically solar projects in India. The IREDA, banks, and multilaterals form an important link for funds. The policy formulation is a two-way process between MNRE and various central planning and regulatory bodies. So I've also tried to show the flow of policy, R&D, funds, and implementation, in the entire mechanism. And this forms a very robust, this forms a very robust renewable energy policy framework in the country. So, so it lists out various interventions by the center, state, and the national level interventions when they address all the three chevrons: supply side policy, pricing and taxation policy, and the demand side policy as well. So the central level support provides the tactical details for the overarching strategy formulated by the center. While under the umbrella of the central level policy support, the states have responded with specific schemes, so what I'm trying to say is that the center gives an overarching strategy for this sector in India, while the state performs under that overall strategy, to come out with its own state level policies and interventions to help it. And then we have the national level interventions, which I would term the CERCs, giving its tariff and purchase regulations, the MNRE selection guidelines and all that stuff. And this policy framework, in my opinion, also gives several incentives across the value chain. So what I've tried to do is that I've tried to see the entire value chain, and I've distributed whatever benefits the government gives to the entire sector across the entire value chain, right from the equipment manufacturing and the plant setup to demand for equipment and RE production, and to the use of renewable energy. So, there are several incentives, so I'm not drilling down into the specific details of the incentives available. I have that ready with me, so if any of you want that, I can give you a copy of that as well. There's a huge list of incentives available, from income tax breaks to custom excise duty exemptions to feed-in tariffs, RPOs, GBIs, available of soft loans, government subsidies, etc. So all this is under a strong institutional and a regulatory framework. So at least the government is able to give various incentives across the entire value chain. Now that's a good part. Lastly, thirdly, I would want to come to the draft targets for renewable energy capacity addition for India's 12th five-year plan. So this data is not yet out in the public. I attended this meeting just day before yesterday, so I thought I'll take the latest possible numbers for you. So the performance of renewable energy capacity addition has sharply risen in India. And this is mainly due to the increasing awareness, the rising learning curve, supportive government policy, and interest by the international community. As we can see, the capacity addition in the 11th plan is almost met, and the additions in most of the aspects in the 11th plan alone surpass the total capacity up to the 10th plan. So because of this good performance by the government on the 11th plan, at least in the RE space, and this is what it looks like by the numbers hide more than what they can reveal though, but still. So because of this good performance, and also with a cognizance of the risks offered by this new market, I would say, in India. So everybody understands these risks as well. The main actual risk in the sector is that the present generation cost is much higher than the conventional energy, as I said before. And the government policies and regulations are continuously evolving. And this actually gives birth to all the perceived or the actual risks in the market. Some of them I've tried to show in a very consulting type of a diagram. I don't know whether you appreciate this or not, but yeah, but I thought I'll put this. And while everybody understands and is cognizant of the risks, everybody also is highly, highly keen on leveraging the opportunities, which in my opinion are far, far outweighing than the market risk. Any new market offers risks, and the opportunities are far greater than the risks. So because of the good performance in the 11th plan, cognizance of the risks, and the intention to leverage the far outweighing opportunities, the government has a very aggressive plan for the 12th, very aggressive targets for the 12th plan for year 2012 to 17. So this table lists out the physical targets for the period 2012 to 17. As we can see, for the grid connected, the targets are almost 2.5 times of the 11th plan. Wind power is 15,000 megawatts. Solar power is 10,000, which is a part of the solar mission. Waste to energy is 500 megawatts. Biomass total is 2,000 megawatts. Small hydro is 2,100 megawatts. While geothermal and wave power is only in the R&D space, so basically a few demonstration projects of 7 megawatts each. Wind is still expected to lead the renewables pack in India, as the technology is mature, as Nasiman has already talked about. And it's expected to be followed by solar energy, which is expected to ride the National Solar Mission wave. So, yeah. But the key is that we have to get a few working, running business models on the ground. That will build confidence and experience and the learning curves. And then we can actually see, the sector growing in leaps and bounds in the country. This I'm talking only about is the grid-connected RE. The plan also talks about very aggressively about the off-grid and distributed renewable energy capacity addition in the country. Now this has, of course, this has various other components to it. Other than the electricity component of distributed RE, we also have number of biogas plants, improved cook stores, and solar thermal collector area. So this is what this slide talks about. And the targets for this is around 3,500 for the electricity component of it. The targets are around 3,500 megawatts, which is around 6 times the targets of the 11th plan. So this shows how aggressive at least the government wants to be on this space, because the real benefit of renewable energy lies for the people who do not have access to modern energy. And because of the decentralized nature of renewable energy, you can actually reach those people where the grid is not there, and give them energy for their development needs. It is very, very critical that suitable financial mechanisms in addition to domestic resources are put into place, so that the decentralized component or the off-grid component of renewable energy doesn't fall through the cracks. Everybody seems to be talking a lot about grid-connected renewable energy all the time. The reason which I believe is actually when we talk to companies or with organizations to implement distributed renewable energy, nobody has a clue on any viable business model. I mean, I see files and files lying in the government only because there is no solution to it. It's not that, you know, the government doesn't want to do anything about it, but there is no solution from anybody. I mean, there is no viable business model coming forward in this space. I mean, if anyone has a viable business model for implementing distributed RE capacity addition in the country, you know, where the entire energy mix can be given to the rural people, you know, on a profit-generating business model, I think the government is extremely open and consultative on this. So there is no point I see against that. Lastly, I would want to come to some major challenges faced in the RE capacity addition in India till date and some mitigation mechanisms going forward. On this slide, again, this I have tried to adapt from the Energy Expert Committee of the 12th five-year plan. This lists down some various challenges faced. Most of you are already aware of these. Again, as I've there is one typing mistake which is there. So the second portion is not grid connected; it's actually off-grid or decentralized. So as I was telling before, you know, that there are lack of viable business models, and there is non-availability of institutional finance and infrastructure at the local level. Yes, so the government is also a party to this, that the government doesn't have any suitable institutional mechanisms at the local rural level to implement off-grid solutions. And the financial infrastructure and regulatory bottlenecks affect each other. I think, you know, financial infrastructure and regulatory bottlenecks, you know, are just, you know, so they are just manifestations of each other, you know, and they mainly arise due to the present high cost of renewables. So, you know, if the cost part is, in my opinion, if the cost part is taken care of through regulations, you know, so every other issue can be resolved in this sector. Now, I come to a few mitigation mechanisms, you know, for addressing the financial issues in this sector. So I had a few solutions, or, you know, a few inputs from people. I tried to put that into a framework. So first is that that there can be some structural changes in the domestic lending by banks. By structural changes, I mean, my perspective might be a bit off, but by structural changes, what I mean is that, you know, that currently what is happening is that renewable energy falls under the infrastructure portfolio of banks. And because of that, the sector exposure limits, you know, some viable bankable RE projects don't end up getting the requisite finance. This is at least, you know, what the input, you know, what input, you know, the government has got. So, you know, what is proposed is that, you know, probably we can set up some internal limits under the infrastructure lending portfolio for renewables, so that, you know, bankable RE projects do not face an unfair advantage of not getting the requisite funding. And then we can have a priority sector classification to RE projects. So currently, priority sector classification is given to projects which have a social, you know, and a societal benefit impact, positive impact, you know, and for the off-grid or distributed renewable energy, as we've talked before. So, you know, they have a lot of societal and social benefits and environmental impacts. So, you know, they can be clubbed into the priority sector classification so that they can get funding much easily. Next, we can have access to domestic and global funding. One of the problems is the long-term funds, which can be gained through the domestic loans from the insurance sector, provident funds, and pension funds. I'm not an expert in this, but this is, you know, what, you know, what my notes, what I've made, you know, over some period of time, you know, they talk about this. And then some international long-term loans from multilaterals, bilaterals, and other international donor organizations. While if we want to reduce the cost of funds, you know, we can have some mechanisms like the tax-free RE bonds, special infrastructure RE bonds, capital gains bonds, and the reduction of government guarantee fee. the government reduces this guarantee fee on projects on the funding, the interest rates can come down a bit. Basically, the issue is that the asset liability mismatch of RE projects which happens, because RE projects require funding of more than 10 years or something, while the average maturity of banks' resources is significantly lower. That causes a mismatch in the ALM, so that's why. And then government is actively thinking and acting on creation of national funds. I mean, you must be all knowing about the National Clean Energy Fund, the NCEF, which is collected by levying a cess on coal, is 50 per ton of coal. So this can be and will be used by the by the government on the subsidy which it gives on various RE programs. And then something called as the Renewable Energy Development Fund, the REDF, the corpus of resources of scheduled commercial banks to the extent that they fall short in their obligation to lend to the priority sector. So the remaining money can be put into the REDF, and this can be administered by the REDA. So this was briefly, how some issues on financing can be solved in addition to technology and vertical integration, and gaining efficiencies for bringing the cost down. Next, I want to focus on some infrastructure-related issues in the sector. Something which is, quite unanimously, thought about people is the absence of grid and evacuation infrastructure. I mean, it requires urgent investments in the grid, but this will require a lot of strengthening of state utilities. The whole issue, I think, of the grid and the evacuation infrastructure not present is because the state utilities are in a very bad shape. And this is, on its way of abatement, because the government is very soon, and by very soon I mean, over the next 4 or 5 years, they will definitely remove that blanket subsidies on electricity, where only targeted subsidies will be given. And we can already see electricity prices rising across various utilities. So once the actual pricing of electricity is done, and then the electricity theft and inefficiency can be addressed, the financial condition of utilities will increase, and hence they will have more money to invest in evacuation and grid infrastructure. And yes, we should definitely invite private sector investments through PPPs in the T&D space, which is already happening and should be done more. And then, as I talked about, that for the off-grid solutions, one thing is that viable business models are not there, and also the government infrastructure is not present at the local rural level. So yes, we should be setting up infrastructure for off-grid RE solutions. We can set up institutional mechanisms to create awareness and infrastructure for implementation. Now very interesting one piece, which I've got to hear is that you go to a rural area, to a village, and to a household, you give a solar lantern and say, that okay, this is your electricity. They don't understand that. They do not want that. They say this is not electricity. Electricity is something which comes through the wire, through an overhead transmission thing, on which they can push a button, and then the light of the fan switches on. This is the electricity which they want. So a solar lantern or something like that is just a toy for them. So so they don't feel satisfied by that. So I think there is a need to create some awareness, on this, so that such mental blocks don't come into the way. And yes, I invite the private sector for this, for their participation with local entrepreneurs to innovate business models through subsidies and setting up of non-profit funds, CSR donations. Something can be done. And yes, in addition to creating money and and improving the infrastructure, improving the financial condition of state utilities, technological progress can also help develop infrastructure. One is, that the right assessment of renewable energy resources need to take place. Now, one thing which solar sector is facing a problem in India is that there is no correct assessment of solar energy in the country. Somebody depends on the NREL data, somebody depends on the NASA data, somebody depends on something else. So we need to set up resource assessment centers across the country so that we really know, at which area has what potential of renewable energy, and hence what kind of grid infrastructure and mechanisms or funding is required to evacuate power from that space. Then we can also assess the hybrid energy systems, say solar and wind, and analysis of the infrastructure required in that case, because we talk about the grid variability happening. So in case some hybrid systems are set up, say biomass and wind, or say wind and solar, or something else, so hence what kind of grid infrastructure would be required, and hence what kind of funding and mechanisms would be required for that. Then we come to technological developments for infrastructure. The government should fasten the net metering for rooftop solar and applications of solar for telecom and other off-grid applications, because that needs to be done very, very quickly. And then research and storage technologies, because we talk about the renewable energy being intermittently available. So we need to do some research and storage technologies so that we can mitigate the grid variability aspect of it. Lastly, I would want to address some regulatory issues, though I personally believe that we have a very strong regulatory mechanism in place, and we are lucky or fortunate to have that. But yes, there has been a lag on the implementation of RPO and REC mechanisms. Again, the lag on the RPO mechanisms also is a manifestation of the state utilities not having enough money. We tell a state to have 1% of their electricity through renewable resources, but if they don't have money to pay for that higher cost of renewables, how can they have 1% through electricity? So they would rather cut electricity for 4 hours in a day than to buy from renewable resources, because they don't have the money for that. Yes, a few suggestions going to the government for the 12th plan are these: imposing of penalties for non-compliance of RPOs by states. Maybe if by 2014 say they don't comply with the RPOs, they would have penalties of some kind. I don't know whether penalties of money would help again in that manner. The states committing to RPOs for a period of at least 10 years. States, probably they can specify RPOs within renewable resources, okay, that this much percent of solar, this much of wind, depending on what resource is more available in which part of the country. And improving the market design for the REC markets. I personally don't, I have my doubts about the REC market. And then creating RPO compliance mechanisms by the resource deficit states beyond the REC mechanisms. And yes, setting up of task-oriented institutions, for implementation of RE programs. RE research institutes, and promoting RE, say, in solar cooking for midday meals and increasing volumes of solar cooker programs. Basically, awareness is also a very important part on promoting renewables, both in grid and off-grid. Easing of government procedures is very, very important. We have to simplify government procedures. People presently in the solar space, they go crazy running from one government department to the other. So we can have, say, a dedicated corporation called the Renewable Energy Corporation of India, NRECI, for a single window clearance and implementation for the projects. And then we have the Payment Security Fund to ensure smooth payments to the power developers without the developer running to the state utilities for getting payments. And then one other thing which is being talked about, again, this I've put under the easing of government procedures, is because there's a talk of this biomass mission being proposed in the 12th five-year plan. Narasimhan had touched on that very, very briefly. So there has been a proposal for the introduction of a cohesive policy framework for addressing various aspects of biomass power. Now, the reason I've put this into easing of government procedures is that this cohesive policy framework can address all the issues, the supply chain, cost, technology, attracting investments and everything. The supply chain is a big issue in biomass at least. And then promoting the usage of surplus agro residues and energy plantations in the country and having dedicated energy plantations for biomass. This at least biomass mission, the proposal talks about. Whether or not this is implemented, that we'll see in the coming months. Yes. And there's an active participation from the private sector would require easing of government procedures and security of payments. Hence, we can only if we guarantee payments and we ease government procedures, we can invest the private sector to come into the space. Otherwise, it would be a great challenge. This is what I wanted to share with you today. So, thank you so much for your time and patience. I think we can have
any questions, folks?